probably flown with more instructors and pilots around than anyone else. I've rated all the overseas pilots that have been here and for years have carried around. The overseas pilots, they're all very good pilots. They flew very well. They did quite a lot of soaring, weak conditions, all that sort of stuff. I learned to be able to tell quite quickly where guys were at. With all the instructors that I've flown with, there's three that come to mind who weren't very good.
One is Bruno. No.
Pardon?
Sorry, nothing.
I had difficulty staying up. Unfortunately, they were all Kiwis. And unfortunately, they're all from this club. Fortunately, they're not flying with us anymore. And the problem with them was, I'll get back to this too, and the last guy I did, if I'd been sitting in the back seat, I would have clipped him around the ears. We took off to do a renews rating. Got into some weak lift, and the stick was flying all over the place. I thought it must be a very choppy sky. We weren't making it. He said, "Oh, would you like to have a go?" So I took over, and lo and behold, the sky was absolutely smooth. The glider settled down and sort of centered, and I reclined, and he said to me, very patronisingly, "Oh, you still fly pretty well." Which I thought was a bit off. And another instructor that I flew with too had this rare, besides doing all the stuff with the stick.
Keep down. Sorry, I should have walked.
There's this incredible centering technique where he flew around here, came around, and then instead of just straightening up to move, he went down and did that. So he had this, decided to stick doing this, and would suddenly launch into a right-hand turn here and then launch into a left-hand turn, which was pretty bizarre. And so this stirring the porridge thing, in fact Tony mentioned every time we do that it creates drag. Tony and I were sort of dragged into this because of that long weekend where we had 2 days of weak conditions. There was a general falling out-a-thon going on down here. And Tony and I managed to get away for several hours, and when I came back, one of the guys asked me, he said, "How the hell did you start with that stuff? We watched you." And I said, what happened was I came off the launch at 2,000 feet, flew around, there was nothing. At about 1,100–1,200 feet at the north end of the ridge, I suddenly found something very weak. So I hung around and I fiddled around until I sort of, I wasn't climbing, it was a zero sink, half a knot up, half a knot down. And I just stayed there and wouldn't let go because there was nothing else anywhere, and I thought I could be sitting on a bubble. Sometimes you get a thermal bubble that just sits there. And eventually I worked my way up, and I took my time and I launched. It was 45 minutes to get to the top of the thermal. I ended up over Stonehenge. And I said I just had to sit there and sit there. And this guy said to me, "Oh, I haven't got the patience for that sort of thing." So there's one answer. It's patience, patience, patience. Because again, I'm talking about light conditions. And because I have the advantage of flying labels for years. I used to fly a standard label. And then the open label I've got now, it's even better than the standard label. It's very light. It's even 5 kilograms lighter than the standard label. And I can feel everything. And I tend to fly by feel. And it's this business of Tony and I have been flying for a long time. And I've got very antiquated gear in my glider. I've got an old Cambridge and mechanical gear and actually do it differently. And I started using computer gear years ago, and I thought actually I prefer just flying by feel. And so with a light glider, that advantage is that I can feel what's going on, and I will feel it and start to turn before the video even tells me what's going up. And so that feel is very important. Something you just develop, it takes years and time. And I tend to fly really by feel rather than the vario. But as you say, once the acceleration's over, you have to use the vario. And my vario sometimes is so antiquated, I tend to just glance at the the altimeter.
Right.
To see
Oh,
whether
the
I'm
speed
actually-
of the altimeter. Oh, that's interesting.
to see whether it's actually going up. So, and the other thing, now this is just, everyone has different ideas and theories on, and you can read all the books on centering, and Tony's talked about that and this and that and the next thing, as to how you shift and whatever. And again, I don't think about it much. And I've read all the books, and they're all in the library there years ago. I haven't read any theory books for ages, but it's all there. But eventually it just comes, and it's the same way I teach music, with music, that you have to learn things first, and then eventually the instinct takes over, or the reflex actions take over. And the only time I really think about things is when I'm trying to explain to somebody else, to a student, where to go to center. But the other thing, and of course, my upper label's got flaps, which is a hell of an advantage, with a light glider as well. But various stories I've heard from people about thermaling, as pulling up in the surges, pulling up when you go around into the wind thing. There was a great theory around years ago that on any given day the thermal always rotated in one direction. So to get the best of the day, you had to figure out which way it was rotating. And you did that by flying one way first, taking a note of what your climb rate was, then changing direction, and then you established whether it was a left-hand day or a right-hand day. That guy's actually very good at staying up, so maybe he's got something.
Oh, maybe. Yeah.
But I'll just tell you what I do in my glider to avoid all this business or whatever. In fact, converting guys to the standard level years ago in Paraparana, aerotone, frisky conditions. And when I drew it myself, I have that knee, and I bring that, and I have my wrist against that knee there. And like that weekend with the very weak conditions, I actually put that handle there. And so the only movement I can do is that. So you don't do this, and even in the bumps, I say with aerotone, it stops anything. That's just the way I do it. If you can hold your arm steady like that, that's fine too. But I just find that's really good, and I can keep my movements to an absolute minimum, and even my feet, because it is absolutely critical in light conditions that you don't waggle the controls all over the place, and keep things very steady, and keep your speed steady. And the speed to fly in the thermals, again, I've heard stories you fly as slow as possible. There's a minimum sink speed, which increases with your angular bank. So you generally stick to that. I've got all sorts of different minimum sink speeds with the different flap settings. But again, I can feel it, and sometimes you can break the rules of that because you might be able to turn steeper, and you might be flying faster than your minimum sink speed, but you might be getting closer to the core of the thermal, which might be stronger, which might be an advantage you just don't know on the day. And if you're going around and I try something and the vario tells me I'm going up, I'll buy it even if I'm not at the correct minimum sink speed, because you just might be in a stronger bit of air. So that's basically all I wanted to talk about really, was patience in light conditions and no porridge stirring. Keep that stick steady and your feet steady, don't do all this sort of stuff. Any discussions on that?
How do you know? How do you decide your thermaling speed?
How do you decide your thermaling speed?
Open to the
Well,
audience.
well, first of all, and I think I've hammered you guys with this, I always ask people, what's your best LD speed? What's your minimum sink speed? And I get all sorts of answers, and it's very important to know that minimum sink speed. What's the minimum sink speed of the DG?
1,000,
DG 1000.
50, 48, yeah, 50.
So I mean, you should know
You
the
should
minimum
know,
sink
right?
speed, because
Yeah.
there's no point in flying slower than it, is there? You know, If the minimum sink in the DG 1000, then it depends whether it's one up or two
Well,
up.
maybe if the core is very tiny and you
If it's-
really need to turn tight, in
Well,
that case
this is
it
what I was
might
talking
make
about.
sense.
Hang on.
Sorry.
If the minimum sink speed in the DG is 50, why fly at 45 in a straight line?
Oh yeah, of course.
And if the minimum sink speed is 50 and you're in a 30 degree, 40 degree bank, will you still fly at 50 or 40?
No.
Yeah. So that's.
When you would fly, is there any reason why you would fly faster, way faster than that in a thermal?
Well, it depends on the angle of the bank. I mean, sometimes, and again, with very small thermals, I've gone over 45 degrees and that's flying quite fast. And it might work and it might not. If it doesn't work, well, I'll give up and open out a bit. You have
When you're in the wave and you're thermaling up in the wave and you're in the rotor part, if you're flying at min sync, you're promptly going to stall and spin or give yourself a headache.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a little bit faster, you'll be able to handle whatever the glider you want to do. Also, his idea of holding if you're in the rough weather, you also want to hold your arm on your leg. Because if you're flopping around with your stick, holding it in the air with your arm, every time you hit a bump, then you're going to make it worse.
Well, that's what I say with aero tow with a libella in frisky conditions.
Yeah.
So get that big even hold that hand there. And that's not a sort of an issue if you think you should have that hand there. If you're used to winch launching, you should have your hand at the knob.
Yeah.
Because really, pulling off on aero tow is almost unheard of, especially with a motor thing. And on a libella anyway, the release is right next to the stick, so it's right there if anything goes wrong. But doing that in frisky conditions is really rotor wave, anything like that. And so in just light conditions I do that just so that I don't move and just let the glider go by itself. I don't think there's anything else that I haven't. Oh, the other thing that I noticed some guys in one of these instructors I flew with, the DG, the trim, just a constant rattle of the trim being adjusted all the time. Clack, 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 clack. What's going on? Now again, I know there's some different views on this. I hardly change my trim at all. And I know other people are the same. And then I've heard other theories that you should always retrim in a thermal or whatever you're doing and trim to neutral and whatever. I don't know, whatever suits you, but I actually prefer to fly with a little bit of back pressure. And this is probably from my competitive yachting days, where you always, when you sail on the wind close to the stall, you have a bit of lee helm so you can actually feel it on the helm rather than in neutral. Other guys like to fly, obviously they're constantly retrimming with a stick in neutral. I don't know, whatever suits you. If you think you can fly better in neutral all the time, fine. If you can fly better. The trim doesn't vary much on the libella. I set it at about 50, which is best LD and final approach speed and all that sort of thing. And of course if I've got the flaps out and I'm going a bit slower, it all changes, but that particular glider is not much difference. I would only change the trim if I'm belting up to about 80, 90 knots between things. You know. But have you noticed, Tony, some of the people was constantly trimming all the time in and around thermals?
Once you come off the winch and then you've got 55 knots or 50, whatever you're going to thermal at, you think, set the trim and that's it. Leave it.
Yeah. But as I said, I've noticed quite a few people are constantly retrimming. And I don't know, whatever makes your wheels spin.
I think that's the right answer.
Pardon?
I think that's the right answer, whatever works for you.
Yeah. I don't know if there's anything wrong in it, but it just, I don't know.
It comes from the days when we had an elevator, I'm allowed to interrupt for a second, where we had
This is a forum we can all talk.
a trim pad. you have the elevator here at the back, and you had then another one which was hinged here, and it was on the back. So when you wanted to fly faster, you had to get this to come up the trim tab. Now you see that on the darts and old gliders.
There.
Yeah, the K6 has it. And what that does, when that goes up, this comes down,
Twin Aster also has
which then makes you fly faster. But today, we don't have that. We don't have any of that. It's all done under your seat in the glider. It's the springs under here that is doing it. So this constant retrimming to get better airflow doesn't apply. It's purely that if you let the stick go, which way will it go? And if you're on final and you momentarily lose the stick because it's so rough, then you've got to be able to say, well, it slightly goes forward. But that's all.
I think that if you've got, with the trim, I think, well, with the thousands in particular, if you've got the centre of gravity in the right place, and
Yeah, that's the first requirement.
then it's a whole lot easier to fly and,
Yeah.
and keep trimmed. But if you've got the CG too far forward, you're going to have a battle the whole flight.
When the glider is properly on with the CFG in the right place, it's like sitting on top of a ping pong ball. It really is right. If you've got the trim forward, you're here somewhere, and you're constantly having to pull the nose up. If you've got it too far aft, you're constantly having to push it forward. Both are drag, and that's what you don't want to have. You do want to get a nice,
Exactly.
and the glider glides better,
Heaps better.
heaps better, in fact. That's how is that a fair description? It helps.
Okay, just the last thing I'd just like to talk about is the position of your yaw string or woolly on thermal.
The expensive instrument, most expensive.
I've read in odd magazines things that you should always, or you're turning, you should fly with some slip. Is it really slipping or is it just an imagined slip? If you take the glider like that, the centre of gravity is there, and you're turning, in a circle like that. Your nose is actually outside of your line of travel. So your yaw string is going to be at an angle like that, flying out. But you're not actually in slip. And it depends. Of course, on my label, the yaw string is there and the centre of gravity is not far behind my head, so it's kind of pretty well negligible, that sort of thing. DG, got quite a
Yeah, DG is a
the
lot.
distance between there and the CG, so there is a bit of that.
that's what it does it, yeah. That's what does it. The center of gravity will be aligned with
Yeah.
your circle if you're balanced, right? If you're all coordinated, and so obviously then the fuse, and especially the front tip of the fuse, which is away from the center of gravity, will have to be slipping a little. Right?
This is one of these funny things where
Yeah.
you teach people you must fly a well-balanced turn, which most people think the woolly's got to be in the middle. Then you, all of a sudden you get told in the turn have the woolly slightly to the outside on a big 2-seater.
See,
I was always taught
it
it in
would
the
be
middle.
interesting to see, to have a glider with the ball, you know, that the things that airplanes have,
Yeah.
and see what's the difference between the ball and the woolly, you know. That would give you, if the ball is, but then
Not accurate.
no, because the ball also is in the front, so it's gonna have the same effect. What did I say, mate?
If you put it back on the seat.
Yeah, you need to put it there. Yeah. Oh, that's complicated.
They just have a big video.
But I have actually seen it written that you should fly with a bit of slip, and I don't know if that's correct or not, or whether it's just an implied slip because the wool is slightly off centre. My theory on that is if I'm climbing better with it on the outside, I'll buy it. If I climb better with the woolly straight, I'll buy that too.
Yeah.
The diameter of a turn and the amount that the centre of gravity is on the turn and the string is on the outside, that percentage is so small.
Yeah.
It's very small as if compared to your total turn that you're doing. It's a very small number.
Yeah. As I said, on my guide, it's pretty well negligible because of that distance that is so small. But however, that's just an interesting topic. Do you fly with intended slip in a circle?
No.
No. Does anybody do that?
It's always interesting if you're in the back seat of a DG, you can actually see the two different, slightly different angles of your spring, very slightly. And I'm often just encouraging the students, once they've got the hang of it, some coordination, just put a little bit of top load on. Almost not so much because that makes it fly better, but just to get them used to the idea that you do not want the string the other way.
No, the other way is counter.
The other way is not good. Yeah.
Kevin, I saw with the best demonstration of that I've ever seen was with Trevor Mollard and a duo discus, and we went spinning, so that was the nature of the beast on that day. And the duo, if you had the string on the outside, it is almost impossible to spin. It is almost impossible to make a spin. So in the mountain courses down there, it's always, you're always taught keep that string on the
Keep on the outside, yeah. It's a safety mechanism.
Yeah.
Certainly close to the hills and things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But I mean, that's the standard exercise we do. People would have the woolly on the outside and then try and spin it, and then suddenly put the other rod in and away she goes. But yeah, certainly the having the string on the outside is a real safety. Because that's why I get uptight with people, the question mark final turns. Well, it's actually got nothing to do with staying up in light conditions. But there's a few people guilty of onto base leg and then they overshoot the final turn, you end up with a question mark turn like that.
That's my favorite thing to do, Kevin.
Are you looking at me?
No, my favorite thing to do. For some reason, when I fly with Kevin, I always end up doing that. He writes that on my logbook.
So you tend to over rudder when you do that, and that's not good. Anyway, just supposed to be thin and staying up in light conditions. Anybody else got anything to add to it or questions? If you want to stay up in light conditions, buy K6E or what else. That makes it easier.
Yes, today's menu is liquid sunshine.
I think you don't get better at scratching just by staying on the ground, then you're just scratching.
Absolutely. That's why the Australians sometimes don't do too good, because they don't fly on 2 knot days.
They won't fly on the cloud bases lower than 4,000 feet.
Yeah, you know, and then when they go to a World Championships, then they can't stay up and they can't fly because it's only 4,000 feet.
Poor guys, only
That's
4,000.
If you use 3,000 of that, that's 30k you can go down the road.
Yeah.
That happened to me at the Southern Cross Gliding Club in Sydney. And I flew there and the guy said, "Oh, it's a pretty tough day." He said, "Sure you want to fly?" I said, "Oh, well, I'm here, we'll go for a fly." And we struck something very weak and I turned it in and I went right up to 45 degrees and climbed, and he said, "Jesus," I said, "where'd you learn to fly like that?" He came down and he said, "You want to see the way this guy there was talking about his other fellas?" And the others thought it was, hardly worth flying. Anyway. Is that it?
Thank you for coming, guys.
Yeah. Thank you, gents, for sharing your wisdom. Well done.
Now what?